Leica announced a new M11 monochrome camera, and it features a Sony A7rV 61 megapixel sensor without a RGB filter to be entirely monochrome. And the interesting thing is that Jordan and Chris from Petapixel tested the M11 and compared it with the A7rV and found that the M11 has one stop more light gathering capability than the Sony A7rV. And I think it's now time to make the case for a Sony A7rV monochrome version. But before we talk into detail about that, please take 2 seconds time to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button to not miss any of my upcoming videos. Chris and Jordan left the preview for Petapixel and they published a new video where they reviewed the new Leica M11 monochrome camera, and there's an interesting part where they compared the image quality between the M11 and the Sony A7rV. Of course, the Sony A7rV images are natively in color, but in post-production you can make it black and white, and so they compared the quality between the M11 and the A7rV, and the difference is quite visible. There is much less noise on the Leica and much more sharpness. The difference is about 1 stops in terms of light gathering capability. This means, for example, that if you would use a 4.0 lens on the Leica, it would have the same light gathering capability as a 2.8 lens on the Sony. So having a monochrome sensor really makes a visible difference, mainly for 2 reasons. First of all, by getting rid of the RGB filter, every pixel collects every photon it can. There is no filter on top that removes some of the photons. Everything is used to create the image. The second reason is that there is no interpolation between the pixels, because if you have an RGB filter, you have to interpolate between 4 pixels to create the information on 1 pixel. This doesn't happen on the monochrome, so you have the full sharpness of each pixel. That said, I think there is a real business case for Sony to make a monochrome version of the Sony A7rV. It wouldn't cost that much, you just keep the same body, the same sensor, you get rid of the filter, and of course you would have to spend some money on marketing this, but it wouldn't cost really that much to make such a camera. And there are also 2 good reasons why I think the camera would actually sell. First of all, I think there is a market for people that want ultimate image quality. Having 1 stop of extra dynamic range and light gathering capability, having more sharpness is something that people can appreciate and maybe need for their work. So I don't think a monochrome A7rV would actually eat into the sale of the current A7rV. Those would be completely 2 different cameras, and Sony would tap into a new niche. The second reason why I think for Sony this makes sense is because they don't have competition in this, because the Leica M11 is really a very expensive niche camera. There's nobody else making monochrome full-frame cameras. There is Pentax now doing a sort of APS-C DSLR monochrome camera, but I'm sure this will not sell in masses. So Sony has pretty much a virgin territory in front of them. And I want to end this video with a very personal and philosophical note. I always found that having very specific niche gear improves you as a photographer. And now I want to bring you 2 examples of gear that made me a better photographer. The first camera is the Mamiya 7. This is a medium format film camera, and I bought it 15 years ago, and it definitely improved the way I took images. With that one, I'm forced to think, and I'm forced to improve because it costs a lot to miss 1 picture. It's very expensive to buy a film, it's very expensive to develop a film, and you don't have a lot of photos available on a single film. The second gear that I want to show you is the Voigtlander 40mm 1.2 lens that is made for the E-mount. I use it as a standard lens on my Sony A7rV, and the reason why this made me better is that unlike a 50mm lens, the 40mm lens forces you to be 2-3 steps closer to the subject, to the person you want to photograph. That forces you to create intimacy with the person, and this makes really stand out the image when I take a portrait with a 40mm lens. I also like the fact that it's only manual focusing, so I have full control every time about what I want to be focused and what not. and so the autofocus doesn't get in any way into what I want to achieve, and it also makes the lens more compact. If it would be an autofocus lens, it would be much bigger. I still use the Voigtlander on a daily basis, the Mamiya 7 on a weekly basis, and I am sure I would buy a Sony A7rV monochrome version, because I know the moment I step outside the house with a monochrome Sony camera, I have to think differently. I have less choices. I have to be more focused on what kind of image I can take with a monochrome, and it would motivate me to create different kind of imagery than I'm doing now. Now I really think I have to stop, because I see I'm getting lost. It's because I'm in love with that idea, and I could talk for hours and you don't have hours on the other side. So let's not waste time. Just take 2 more seconds to subscribe, or even like this video if you liked it, if you like the idea that Sony makes a monochrome camera. And see you soon for the next rumors. There are many rumors to come. It will be always exciting on this channel, except of those moments where I get a bit lost with videos like this. See you soon.